You know, we see its flags on buildings, we carry its passports in our pockets. We're told it represents us, the people. But what if the nation state isn't what we think it is? What if it's less of a community and more of a tool? A tool with a very specific and maybe hidden purpose. Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. First, we're going to define what the state actually is, based on this historical analysis. Then we'll bust some common myths about it. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of state power, look at some real-world examples that might surprise you, and then ask the big question, is this whole system falling apart? And if so, what comes next?
So let's just dive right in with the big questions. We're taught to think of the state as a neutral referee in society, right? Or maybe the democratic expression of the will of the people. But the analysis we're digging into today says, nope, not even close. It suggests something way more confrontational is really going on. So here it is, the core definition from our source material. The state didn't always exist. It only popped up when society split into different economic classes. Think owners and workers, whose basic interests just couldn't be reconciled. And its number one job? It isn't to be a fair umpire. Its primary job is to protect the property and the power of the group that's already on top. So it's less of a referee and more like a heavily armed security guard for the ruling class.
Okay, but that definition is pretty sharp, right? It definitely doesn't line up with what most of us learn in school. And that brings us to the whole idea of ideology, the powerful, common-sense stories we're told that can mask what's really happening under the surface.
And here's where the two big ideas go head-to-head. On one side, you have the analysis that the state is a weapon, an instrument used by one class to keep another in line. On the other side, you have the much more popular ideas, either that the state is a neutral umpire, just calling balls and strikes fairly for everyone, or that it's the magical embodiment of the nation and the people. This analysis argues that these last two ideas, as nice as they sound, actually serve to hide the state's true coercive function.
All right, so if the state is an instrument, a tool, what are its moving parts? How does it actually enforce this class rule day in and day out? Because it's not just an abstract idea. It's made of very real, very powerful institutions.
You know, when you strip it all down, state power isn't really about post offices and parks. According to this view, it's about control. It's the military and the police, what are called special bodies of armed men. It's the courts, the prisons, the spies, and the tax collectors. These are the institutions that hold a monopoly on legitimized violence. They are the bottom line when the status quo gets challenged.
This quote just puts it all out there, doesn't it? The state is an organization of violence. But the key is that its violence isn't random. It's targeted. It's designed to suppress one class to protect the interests of another. So when you see a massive police response to a workers' strike, but a quiet fine for massive corporate fraud, this analysis would say that's not a glitch in the system. That is the system working as intended. Okay, that is the theory, and it's a heavy one, but does it actually check out in reality? Let's put it to the test. We're going to look at some real-world case studies focusing on the history of post-colonial Africa. So let's take Guinea right after it won independence. The new leader, Sékou Touré, stood up and said, there's no class struggle here. We are all one nation united. A beautiful idea, right? But what did national unity mean in practice? Well, it meant that when workers went on strike for better pay or safer conditions, they were told to shut up for the good of the nation. A nation that was, funny enough, now being run by a new bureaucratic elite. Now, to really get what happened there, we need to understand this key term, the comprador bourgeoisie. This is not your typical business class that builds factories and creates new industries. No, this is a ruling elite whose entire wealth and power come from being the local middlemen for foreign corporations. They don't build up their own country's economy. They get rich by helping foreign powers plunder it. Just imagine a ruling family in an oil-rich country that lives in luxury by signing away drilling rights to a global oil giant while their own people stay poor. That's the dynamic.
And the story of Togo just lays this process out in brutal detail. First, the democratically elected president is assassinated, with suspected French involvement. Then a military coup takes over, and it gets open support from France. Years later, when pro-democracy protests erupt, they're violently crushed, while French troops just happen to be stationed nearby, doing nothing. In the final act, the dictator's son unconstitutionally takes over after his father's death, and he gets crucial diplomatic support from, you guessed it, France. At every single turn, the will of the people was crushed, all with the backing of the former colonial power.
And then you have the tragic story of South Africa. We all celebrate the end of apartheid in 1994 as this incredible victory for freedom. But this analysis argues it was really a political settlement that left the economic structure of apartheid, the mines, the big farms, the banks, all in the same hands. What was the result? Decades of policies that created some of the worst inequality on the planet. And the final chapter, as presented here? The ANC, the Party of Liberation, forms a government with the old party of apartheid. Why? To unite enforcing brutal budget cuts on the poor. It's a shocking journey from liberation movement to manager of the very system it fought against.
So, these historical examples, from Guinea to Togo to South Africa, they aren't just isolated tragedies. According to this viewpoint, they point to a much deeper, systemic crisis. A crisis in the nation-state framework itself, especially in the world we live in today. Sometimes a single number tells you the whole story. Nearly R500 billion. That's the projection for how much South Africa will spend in 1 year, just on interest payments for its national debt. Now, that money isn't building homes or hospitals. It's going directly into the pockets of the global financial oligarchy. It really makes you ask, who does the state actually work for?
And when you visualize it like this, it's just staggering. The chart shows the state's budgeted priorities. Look at that. Over 10 times more money is being spent on paying interest to bankers than on survival-level grants for 8.5 million of the country's most destitute people. This isn't just a tough choice. This analysis argues it's a crystal-clear declaration of the state's real priority. International finance comes first, human beings come a distant second. So here's the real kicker. In our modern, globalized era, the nation-state, the very thing that was supposed to be a shield to protect a country's independence, has become the primary tool for oppression. Powerful imperialist countries and global corporations use the international system of debt, trade deals, and financial institutions to control weaker nations. And that's why, according to this view, simply waving your national flag and talking about sovereignty just doesn't cut it anymore. The game is rigged.
Okay, so if the nationalist project has failed, if the nation-state itself has become a trap, what's the way forward? Where do we go from here? This analysis doesn't just leave us with the problem, it also proposes a solution. The program it lays out has 4 clear steps. Step 1, a total political break. Working people need to stop supporting capitalist and nationalist parties and build their own independent political force. Step 2, the goal isn't just to get new people elected into the old system, but to replace the current state with a new kind of government, one run by and for working people. Step 3, take the economic power away from the tiny elite by putting the major banks and industries under public ownership and democratic control. And finally, step 4, and this is the crucial part, this cannot be done in just one country. It requires workers to unite across all borders to build a fundamentally different socialist world. And so, we're left with this final, massive question. If the nation-state, which once promised liberation, now functions more like a prison cell, is the key to unlock it found in internationalism? Is the only real path forward one that looks beyond national borders to find solutions to our shared global problems? That's the provocative thought at the very heart of this entire analysis.